So, out of popular vote, the next legacy resonator we'll be covering is the supposedly controversial, even Gunabait, Cantarella. Cantarella as a character is very interesting because, yes, she is very provoking, but I think if you played through her character stories and quests in 2.2, she defies a lot of community expectations because she was actually quite a complex and well-written character. And I think that is something even reflected within her symbolism, especially in how she acts as a mirror into the lore of the Thessalia family, Renacita, and even who she is historically based on, being Lucrezia Borgia. But more on that later. As always, if you haven't played through Cantarella's story quest, there will be spoilers ahead. But you should, it's a great story, and in all honesty, it's actually one of my favorites. I think it's well known by now that Renascita, which is Italian for rebirth, takes immense inspiration from the European Renaissance, with the art, carnivals, culture, and religion being incredibly reminiscent of this time in world history. Because of the nature of geopolitics during this time, especially in Italy, but also in other countries like Spain, many powerful families whose wealth and capabilities could even threaten entire countries became very important topics during the Renaissance. This, of course, has been reflected in Renascita, with the Montelli and Thessalia families, who were teased even before the entire region was released. While the Montelli family is very obviously based on the real Medici family in Florence, who were both mercantile and very appreciative of arts and culture, the more conservative and traditional religious Thessalia family in Wuthering Waves is actually also represented by a real-life Renaissance family that was in direct conflict with the Medicis, being the Spanish Borgia family, who were based in Rome. This connection is beyond just simple coincidence, as the Borgia family are even represented in popular culture as being expert poisoners, just like the Thessalia family in-game, which is something we will touch on in a lot more detail in the next few chapters. The similarities, however, just keep piling up. With the release of 2.7 and even more concrete lore on the founding of Renascita, we know that the Thessalias, being the oldest family in Renascita, were actually the progenitors of the Order of the Deep, before they eventually lost control of them during the First Dark Tide. This links the Borgias in real life, who were heavily involved in religious and ecclesiastical affairs, with even two popes, Pope Calixtus III and Pope Alexander VI, coming from their family. While Ragusa, where the Montelli family resides, has iconically Renaissance Italian architecture and echoes the Italian Medici family in real life, the design of Portovino Castle, where the Thessalia reside, has an architectural style which is distinctly Iberian, for example in the Manueline style, as opposed to Italian. This seems to be a very intentional choice, because if you remember, while the Borgia family operated from Rome, they were at their core a Spanish family that traced their roots from Iberia. The Night of Remembrance that begins Cantarella's story quest isn't Italian either, because we can instantly see from the event and the design of the masks, for example, that it's inspired by the Spanish celebration of the Day of the Dead. If we are to look at these regions even further, Ragusa, the city dominated by the Montellis, seems to be a mix of two real Italian cities, Ragusa and Ravenna, while Portovino, the area dominated by the Thessalias, actually seems to be Portuguese, being a mix of the actual river city of Porta, which was built on steep cliffs, and Veno, which comes from veneno, being the Portuguese for venom. Considering that both the Thessalia family and the Borgia family are famous for their poisons in a way, Portovino, which kind of alludes to a fortress built on cliffs, which specializes in poisons, actually makes a lot of sense when you draw the two together. In popular culture, the Borgias are very famous for being elusive and very sinful, not to the extent of being evil, but pretty up there when it comes to the idea of a dark family who is powerful and was involved in a lot of shady business. And that sort of impression, while not verifiably true, and probably fabricated by the Borgias' enemies, like the Medici family, is an idea that has really been inspired and translated into the Phasalia family in Wuthering ways. They are a traditional shadowy family that, though powerful, is seen with fear and contempt by the people of Ragusa. When you first meet Cantarella, Chacona passes along some ill rumors that bodes you to be careful, and Rosemary even says that the normal people call the Phasalias the poison of Ragusa. This less than ideal reputation really tends to match up the Borgia family in real life, but there is one more thing that truly cements this reference. Unlike the other name and etymology analyses that I've done on the channel, Cantarella's name is almost refreshingly straightforward to decipher, because Cantarella, as a word, has only ever been used to mean one very specific thing. Cantarella in real life is a name of a poison, but of course, not just any poison. It was a name given to a blend that has almost reached a mythical status because it was used and kept secret by the Borgia family. And yes, this is the same Borgia family from the previous chapter, who concocted this poison during the reign of Pope Alexander VI, which was also when the infamy and terrible reputation of the family kind of reached a peak. While we don't know for sure where the term Cantarella actually comes from, a lot of historians and, funnily enough, toxicologists have some theories. The first is that it comes from the Greek canfaros, or Latin canfareles, both of which mean a small drinking cup, being inferred as the one that the poison would be administered in. As you can perhaps remember, Cantarella's story and character has an almost excessive use of teacups, which is both used in her story and aesthetic, so this kind of reference could make sense. Additionally, Cantarella may also come from the poison canfaridin, which comes from beetles, and is poisonous but fatal only when consumed in large doses. While I'm more skeptical about this interpretation, one interesting thing about Cantarella as a character is that her poison is actually much more hallucinogenic than fatal, as we see in her Forte report, which is completely at odds with the poisons of other members of the Phasalia family, which are much more lethal and dangerous. Cantarella's poison, like the canfaridin poison in real life, has other effects, and it's only really fatal if you consume it excessively. Regardless of its origin, the fundamental meaning of Cantarella poison is that it is a mythical sort of concoction exclusively used by the Borgia family, which, combined the points we've already gone through in the previous chapter, really ties them and the Phasalia family we have in game together. Now that we've gone through just how closely the real-life Italian Medici and Spanish Borgia families of Renaissance link to the Montelli and Phasalia families we have in Ragusa, now we can start focusing more specifically on Cantarella herself. While we haven't had a lot of resonators that were inspired and based on real people, with our last one being Augusta, who is an analogue of Emperor Aurelian.
Hold it, you dummies.
Drop it.
Cantarella actually seems to be based on quite a famous, or rather infamous person herself. From what we've covered in the last two chapters, you can probably guess, but Cantarella seems to draw heavy inspiration from the most famous member of the Borgia family, Lucrezia Borgia. Being the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, and yes, Lucrezia is the daughter of a pope, which already should be setting off alarm bells, she is a person with a rather mysterious and infamous reputation, to say the least. One of the most famous paintings of her, very helpfully titled Lucrezia Borgia Reigns in the Vatican in the Absence of Pope Alexander VI, really captures the infamy that has persisted since her death quite well. Besides this, Lucrezia, who was born during the peak of and is partly responsible for the rumors of the Borgia family's terrible reputation, was said to be very beautiful, comparable to the goddess Minerva in Roman mythology. She also had 3 husbands, the first 2 of which died under mysteriously murderous circumstances. This whole reputation means that it is no exaggeration to say that Lucrezia Borgia is one of history's most famous femme fatale figures, something which you can probably already see linking a lot to Cantarella as a character. This connection is pushed even further when you consider that the reputation of the Borgia family as expert poisoners is actually something that was heavily pushed, at least culturally, by Lucrezia herself, who was rumored to have a hidden ring that could sprinkle Cantarella poison into a victim's drink. While of course there is no factual basis for these rumors, this mysterious, almost immoral and dangerous reputation is more than just a coincidence for Cantarella herself, who throughout the story missions as well as in her lore through her Forte examination report, is veiled in secrecy and mystery, being the only resonator without a proper examination, the only information being given secondhand through Cantarella telling the examiner themselves rather than any direct tests being conducted. Her overclocked diagnostic report also essentially glitches off as it was designated a top secret file, which again completely matches the political intrigue of the Borgia family and its most famous figure, Lucrezia Borgia, in real life. As we finish 2.7, we gain a more thorough understanding of the founding history of Renacita, and as such, we also get more information on the Thessalia family and their relationship with Leviathan and the Deep Sea. In a previous chapter, we talked about just how the Montelli and Thessalia families were based on real Renaissance families, and the architecture of Ragusa and Portovino also matched their countries of origin, one of Italian and the other of an Iberian style. Specifically, the architectural style of Portovino Castle is quite distinctly the Portuguese Manueline style, which is important because it is one that is often built on cliffs near bodies of water like oceans, and also incorporates a lot of maritime and marine elements like anchors, shells, pearls, and ropes in a design. We can further see that even the family name itself, Thessalia, is based on the scientific name of the Portuguese man-o'-war, Thessalia Thessalis. This is a fascinating link because while a lot of people see man-o'-wars as poisonous jellyfish, they actually aren't, they're siphonophores, which is a very fancy way of saying that they are a huge bunch of smaller organisms that are mushed together to form a single entity. If this sounds familiar, that's because this is literally the same as the assimilative force of Leviathan, which consumes individual beings to form them into this collective, single mass of the Dark Tide. As we learn from the 2.7 story, the Thessalia family are not only strongly linked to sea, where Leviathan comes from, hence all this oceanic referencing that we've discussed, but also because their lineage is particularly susceptible to Leviathan's corruption, hearing its whispers that lull them into an endless abyss. This dark fate is hinted at within Cantarella's resonance chain, which spells out an ominous process. Embrace the endless waves, surrender to the elusive reverie, gaze into the abyss, behold your own soul, rest in your reflection, and finally, fall, and fall deeper into the dream. We learn from Cantarella that the Phasalia family has for generations been trying to find a blessed maiden that can become Imperator's chosen resonator. However, because of their ancient lineage and connection to the Order of the Deep, they have been particularly weak to Leviathan's whispers, which, as we know, promises an eternal paradise buried under waves of the dark tide. Before the events of 2.2, Cantarella and the Phasalias were one of the few that knew and had to accept the status quo that Leviathan had already essentially taken over Renacita, having assimilated with Imperator to form the false divinity that the people worshipped. As one of the few that knew the truth, the Phasalia family, alongside their traditional connection to sea, are fated to become one with the illusory abyss of Leviathan's ocean, hence why hallucinations and dreams are such an important part of Cantarella's story. Even Cantarella's poisons, which make illusions, are designed to counteract the madness that Leviathan's whispers create. The Phasalias, who have already been corrupted by Leviathan, keep silent about the truth of the Sentinel, as Cantarella reveals in 2.7, and even create the Divine Trials, placing young girls, oftentimes abducted and not even of the Phasalia bloodline, under immense suffering to find the next Blessed Maiden. The Sea of Ghosts, a sonorosphere and a sort of elusive realm born of the suffering of these girls, is a sort of microcosm for the fate of the Phasalia family itself, to be trapped and enslaved to the influence of the Fernodian Leviathan. It is only now that Raguna knows the truth of who Leviathan truly is that this terrible fate of the Phasalias can be averted.
All I know is this. Those blessed by the sea are ever doomed to bear its curse.
Within Cantarella's story and lore, there is a distinct fairy tale-esque atmosphere that a lot of the Divine Trials and the Blessed Maidens are using to portray. One of the most frequent of these references is the allusion to the poisonous sea apples and the red apple, so much so that Cantarella's story quest mentions it over 50 times. This is an obvious reference to Brother Grimm's fairy tale, Snow White, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know about. Within the story, a poisoned apple, one side safe and the other side poisoned, is offered by the evil queen to Snow White, who eats the poisoned side and falls into a sleeping death, where she can only be awakened by love's true kiss. All of these match very well to Cantarella's story and what we've already talked about, just like the duality of safety and poison within the evil queen's red apple. Cantarella is skilled in both concocting medicines and poisons, just like how the apple's poison lulls its victims into eternal dream, a sleeping death. The Sea of Ghosts Sonoro is trapped in an eternal limbo until you and Cantarella shatter it and let the ghosts of the girls finally rest. The fate of the Phasalias in itself is also symbolically represented with this apple, forever to fall into the illusion and the realm of the dark tide, from the one who offers a poisoned apple of a false paradise, Leviathan. In fact, if you've been watching my channel, you will know that this isn't even the first time that Kuro has used a symbolism of red apples within the Renacita story. Within Chacona's quests, the red apple appears twice as a visual motif of the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden that Satan tempts Eve to eat, representing sin and ambition, and this is translated into Cantarella's story to be something very similar. The red apple in both these stories, from Snow White and the Garden of Eden, are both linked to Leviathan's promise, that if only the people of Renacita follow its will, then people can fall into an eternal slumber, an eternal paradise of bliss. However, we know after 2.7 that Leviathan's assimilative dark tide is not paradise, but only hell, warped by illusions. We can see this reference even more clearly in Cantarella's story. Within the beginning, when you're trying to solve the 3 riddles of the Night of Remembrance, the second merchant who instructs you to pick the store's freshest apple and reveals the riddle of the red apple is called Beelzebub. This itself is a reference to the real Beelzebub, a devil in many Canaanite and Abrahamic religions, but importantly in popular culture, the second name of Satan. In both Chacona and Cantarella's story, red apples represent sin and false promises, while for Chacona she tries to find the truth of Leviathan and the false divinity. For Cantarella, the apple is a poison of eternal sleep for the Thessalians that, as her final resonance chain says, forces one to fall, and fall deeper into the dream of the eternal false paradise that Leviathan promises.
I'll still choose this love that we have.
While jellyfishes are mentioned heavily and integrated into Cantarella's design, they are not the only references to toxicology mentioned within Cantarella's story. In fact, the amount of references to the poisons of the world is actually fascinating, and truly lives up to the reference of the famous poisoning family of the Thessali and the Borgia that we've gone through in previous chapters. We've already gone through how the name of the Thessali family itself comes from the venomous Portuguese man-o'-war, but there are plenty more references. One plant that is mentioned quite often in Cantarella's story is the jelly rose medusa, which is unsurprisingly shaped like a jellyfish. While many people thought that this was a reference to the Greek legend of Medusa, who petrified people into stone, it actually is not. The second, less common meaning of the word Medusa is quite simple, in that it is a word that means the umbrella-shaped body of an adult jellyfish. So, the jelly rose medusa is essentially a plant that is shaped like a bell or the umbrella of an adult jellyfish. Another plant that is mentioned quite a lot is the sea apple that you have to collect in Cantarella's quest, which isn't only a reference to Snow White's red apple from the previous chapter, but also to not a jellyfish, but a sea cucumber, which, you guessed it, is also poisonous, being vibrant in color and prone to release poison into the water, which can kill other aquatic animals swimming in it. Very similar to how the Borgia killed their political opponents by diluting poison into tea or water. Very interesting. One of Cantarella's cousins, Mandragoria Phasalia, is also named after a famous poison. Mandragoria is the scientific name of the real-life mandrake, which is a plant within the nightshade family. Mandrake roots and leaves are poisonous, and nightshade plants in general have been a very popular pick when it comes to assassination, because ingestion of any part of the plant, such as leaves, roots, and berries, are fatal. As a fun fact, as we've already discussed that the Borgia family and Lucrezia Borgia has a notion of the femme fatale, the most famous variant of nightshade, called Atropa belladonna, is Italian for beautiful lady. Very interesting. One of the other girls we meet in Cantarella's story, being Mandragora's sister, is Hebenon Phasalia. I'm sure you basically know the drill by now. Hebenon is also the name of a poison, though not exactly a real one. Hebenon, or Hebona, is, like Cantarella, which we went through in previous chapters, a famous but mythical poison of unknown origin. Specifically, it appears in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, where Hamlet's father tells him that his brother killed him by pouring the juice of the cursed Hebenon into his ear while he slept. Though it is only mentioned a single time in the entire play, it has since become a very hot topic amongst toxicologists, who, like the infamous Borgia Cantarella, have tried to decipher what the real ingredients were for this fictional poison. Despite all of these famous fatal poisons of the world, the final winner of the divine trials, where the Thessalians had to poison each other, until only one person was left standing, was won not by the mandrake, not by the nightshade flower, not by the poisonous sea apple, or the lethal hebanon. It was won by the jellyfish, whose sting was not as fatal as the others, but was able to absorb and survive every other poison. Cantarella's poison, as we mentioned before, is not particularly lethal, being more of a neurotoxin than anything else, but she has consumed and become resistant to nearly every poison there is, and that was why she was the final survivor. However, as the head of the Phasalia family, this small victory is not necessarily an optimistic fate. As she says,
Jellyfish have no voice. They simply drift in the tide, struggling to let their faint glow disperse the darkness.
As we mentioned in this section of Snow White's Red Apple, Cantarella's story mission takes a lot of use of fairy tales, of children's rhymes, which is in itself a cruel mockery of the Phasalia's divine trials, where children had to kill each other to become the Blessed Maiden. There's quite a lot to go through here, so let's get started.
Which is the most beautiful among these dolls? This is the last riddle. The round hat. A girl dons her red dancing shoes and wears a scarlet hat, ready for the final act of her performance.
This is a reference to the fairy tale with Red Shoes by Hans Christian, a terrible story about a girl who loves to dance in a pair of red shoes, so much so that an angel condemns her to keep dancing eternally, even after she dies, which drives the girl into despair. This is a perfect reference to the girls of Cantarella's story, whose souls keep up the eternal performance within the sonorosphere of the Sea of Ghosts, until she and Rover can finally, like in Christian's original fairy tale, stop their dance and grant their souls peace. Within this picture book, which presents the divine trials in a sort of cruel fairy tale kind of way, there is a very interesting final poem that finishes the story, which discusses a gold apple amidst red ones. This is a reference to the infamous Apple of Discord, an apple dropped by the goddess of arguments and strife, Eris. During a wedding, Eris took a gold apple and inscribed upon it, "For the most beautiful," dropping it in the middle of the goddesses of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, which caused a terrible fight that eventually spiraled into the infamous Trojan War that was recounted in Homer's Iliad. Essentially, the golden apple is a symbol of instigation, of an eventual prize that is not worth the cost to get there. Just like how Eris caused the three goddesses to fight for the golden apple, the girls of the divine trial in Cantarella's story fight for the position of the Blessed Maiden, ignoring the cost of death that is needed to get there. After all, as the picture book says, the gold apple will make their dreams come true, but there is a cost, the crown of thorns, that the queen must bear as she takes a juicy bite.
The waves came crashing, eager to snuff out every spark they found.
In another picture book, we see another rhyme that obviously is meant to reflect the terrible fate of the girls who undergo the divine trial, as we previously discussed. However, what you may not know is that this rhyme is a parody of the nursery rhyme that appears within Agatha Christie's famous, if not the most famous, work, And Then There Were None. If you've seen my Chisa video, you would know that Kuro is not averse to using Agatha Christie as a reference, considering that her other book, Murder on the Orient Express, was explicitly referenced in the latest updates. Within the book And Then There Were None, the old minstrel song, 10 Little Soldiers, is really obviously the inspiration behind the picture book in the Sea of Ghosts, as the situations are almost a parallel. Within the book, Christie describes a situation where 10 people are trapped in an island mansion, with the aforementioned rhyme hanging framed in every guest room. When 2 people in sequence die to cyanide poisoning, the guests finally realize that the game is up. This is a fight to the final survivor, just like how the divine trials in Cantarella's story is the same.
As for the first riddle, Siren's Song, the crown atop the mountain and the waterfall that cascaded into the depths below clearly points here. A crown-like castle that sits atop a jagged cliff with a waterfall rushing down. It seems the girls in the riddle were lured into the Portoveno castle. The strange frequencies coming from the music box probably reflect the suffering of the ghost girls, who were poisoned and tortured in the castle.
Young girls trapped in a castle by the sea, poisoning each other until a final survivor remains. And with that, we finish with Cantarella. Honestly, it was a much more interesting analysis than I anticipated to nicely complement a great story quest. Much more than just a Guna character for sure. I apologize as well to the Phoebe enjoyers for my clerical error on the poll, and I'll be making sure that in the future the next resonator will be her, so don't worry too much about that. With that, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you all in the next video.
You despise this place, don't you? But the blood in your veins, it binds you, holds you prisoner in this endless nightmare. You loathe our rules, yet they have already seeped into your very existence.